This is not a YouTube video, this is an apology. To me, a video is all about story and journey. If it isn't that, then it's just a bunch of clips rammed together. But sometimes I have to film things in a certain order because of the circumstances that are presented to me. And that means that the story is occasionally completely turned on its head and it's impossible to put together. In those situations, I either just dump what I've done, or I bite the bullet and show you what happened. It all started on Tuesday morning, 7:30. I filled up with diesel and drove out to Dorset. I had to get there really early because the church I was visiting is world famous. Arrive any later and the holiday makers would have beat me to it. How I love a bright and early start to show you an architectural masterpiece. And this is a church which needs no introduction. The first of 3 churches I'll be visiting today in this beautiful area of the Cranbourne Chase. Welcome to Knowlton. This building dates back to the 12th century. So it's no older than the churches I visit normally, but it looks a lot different, doesn't it? And it serves as a reminder of why we should be so lucky that many of our buildings are still standing proudly. And I've come at 8:30 in the morning, just so that you and I have it in complete privacy. The church stands at the centre of an ancient man-made feature called a henge. And a henge is characterised by a ditch on the inside and a bank on the outside forming a ring with an opening. The name actually comes from Stonehenge, which for reasons I won't explain today is not a proper henge. So the henge, 3000 to 2000 BC, what we'd call Neolithic or early Bronze Age, and the church is Norman, so it represents the shift from pagan worship to Christian worship. There are only about 100 henges in England, and I'm sure you would agree that this architectural site is completely unique. I'm absolutely stunned by this. The church originally served a hamlet nearby, the hamlet of Knowlton, on the banks of the River Allen. But of course, nothing remains of that, and very little of the church, although it does still stand proudly here in the landscape. You can tell that this church is Norman because of the round arches, but the tower dates to the 15th century. I could talk forever about facts and dates, but sometimes you don't need those. You just need to observe. And occasionally, you don't need words at all. So we have a problem here. Me bright and cheerful, the sun beaming down on a late summer's morning, on a building which represented complete tragedy, wreck and ruin and decay. This is not a good way to start a story. It's a good way to end a tragic story, but that's not what I intended. Anyhow, it was off to my second village, 4 miles southwest, Witchampton. Ah, the abundant glory of England. Welcome to Witchampton. I'm on my way to a church which suffered a fate as disastrous as Knowlton's. It wasn't abandoned, no, but it burnt down and it had to be rebuilt in the 1830s. And thankfully, it's now one of the best kept churches in the area. In fact, the village is quite possibly the prettiest in Dorset. And how I love a footpath to navigate my way to the church. The old Wesleyan chapel, but that's not what I'm here for. The organ in Witchampton was built by Peter Connacher, who studied in Leipzig, and after that with Hill and Sons in Lincolnshire. Of course, William Hill built the instrument at St Martin's Church in Salisbury, and then Connacher studied with Walker in London, who built organs at Romsey Abbey and a couple of instruments I've investigated in village churches, such as Wilsford. And here I am, making my gentle descent into one of Dorset's prettiest villages. Filming in villages like this is extremely tricky. I'm walking down roads which have no pavements. In one hand I'm holding the camera that films me, and in the other the one that films what's going on ahead of me. So I'm dual wielding in a place I've never been to before, and sometimes it can be quite tricky to navigate. But even so, this central part of the film was perhaps the most idyllic. These places remind me of being on a family holiday. You see the community shop with the locals going to collect their morning papers, people you've never seen before and you'll probably never see again. And the prettiness of the thatched cottages and the rural landscape, but most of all, the church. I'm going to show you the graveyard first, because it's very much higher than the church, and it gives you one of the most iconic views. What you see before you is the last remaining feature, which shows there was a much older building here. This rebuild dates to the 1830s, but that tower, the 15th century. At the top there are gargoyles, which act like gutters, letting water off the roof. One of them, unusually, is playing the bagpipes. And rest assured, it's 9:30 in the morning and not 3:20 in the afternoon. The clock must have stopped. And I think it's time for me to stop too. There's a very nice bench over there. So it's time for coffee. As I sat there enjoying my favourite beverage, I was reflecting on what these villages really mean to me and what they mean to you watching. And perhaps it's best summed up by the last paragraph in the church history at Witchampton, written in 1955, but it still holds true today, and even more than that, it almost brings a lump to the throat. As you walk about this village, considered as one of the prettiest in Dorset, and go past the church, the manor house, ivy house with its date 1570 on the porch. See the chimneys of the paper mill one end of the village, the old mill wheel and the old bridge at the other end. Think sometimes of all the history lying within these landmarks, and of the people all down the centuries who lived their lives in Witchampton and contributed their part to the continuity of the countryside and of this little bit of lovely England. Such a delightful spot, and a new and original feature adds to the soundscape: the humble donkey. Must be time to make my way inside. Such a perfectly positioned church with this lovely paved area. Just right for a bride and groom making their exit from the church. Let's go inside. He closes the door quietly, not wanting to disturb the peace. Imposing, yet simultaneously intimate. One of my favourite features in churches that I've come to love is having clear glass. Sounds very simple, doesn't it? But it makes a huge difference when the scenery is as beautiful as this. To have a building like this completely to yourself is very special and often quite rare as an organist. I'm used to walking in the church considerably earlier than I thought people would arrive, and yet they're all already there. Take my seat at the organ and I never get to relish the space itself. Now I've returned to the entrance because there's an amazing feature here. The entire church, Victorian, 1830s. I told you that the tower was the only remaining feature on the outside from the old building. Well, how about the inside? This, my friends, is a 13th century font with an interesting history. Of course, it belonged to the old building, but the bowl was found in a nearby field. Any guesses? Yep, it was being used as a cattle trough. But now I'm pleased to say it's back in its rightful place. And it's time to make my way into the chancel, the most sacred space in this entire church, which is very expansive, and the clear windows continue with views of the delightful chocolate box cottages outside. The only stained glass window is here behind the altar, and behind that is Witchampton Manor House. There was originally a tunnel leading from the manor house behind a fireplace, I believe, to get to this church, but it's now been closed off. And here is what I've come to see, and you can hardly miss it, can you? This is the Peter Conacher pipe organ of Witchampton Church. Without even opening the glass, you can see we have two keyboards here, stops on both sides, and a very nice straight pedal board with a balanced swell pedal, and on the left and the right are what we call toe levers. What they do is change a particular combination of stops. So if your hands aren't free, you can still change the sound of the organ. Mendelssohn's Prelude in C minor, which was being composed at just the same time as Witchampton Church was being rebuilt from the ashes. Afterwards, I switched off the power and I left the village and the sunshine behind. My last church was intended as a grand finale. Things don't quite work out like that when the weather changes and it becomes very blustery. But to get there, I had to park in the next village, Hinton Martle, with its lovely fountain and a church of its own. You might wonder, why do I walk to the churches? Why don't I just drive and park outside? Well, the answer is probably best summed up by Laurie Lee. He describes the world of villages like ships in the empty landscapes and the long walking distances between them, of white narrow roads rutted by hooves and cartwheels, innocent of oil or petrol. So I made my way up the footpath towards Chalbury. I walk to these buildings not just to take in the scenery, but also as a reflection of the importance of these buildings in the community, and also out of respect for those who rigorously journeyed to them on foot in days gone by. As I passed the stables, a combine began to roar to my left, and halfway up, I found a bench perfectly sited to look over the incredible vista, and it was here that I took a break. The wind is raging and the combine is blaring in the field behind me, but I couldn't be more happy with my last digestive biscuit and coffee. I found this bench about halfway up towards Chalbury. The village isn't actually that high, only 335 feet, but the views are stunning and unmatched anywhere else in this area. Let me just read you a few of the things you can see from the church. Ringwood Church, Wimborne Minster, Kingston Lacey, the English Channel, Christchurch Priory, and the Isle of Wight. In fact, until 1703, there was an elm tree up there, which was so high that sailors used it for navigation. Unfortunately, there was a storm that year which snapped a third of it off the top, but it gives you an idea of what an incredible viewpoint we will have from the church. It seems funny to lug a rucksack full of equipment up a footpath this steep, but let me tell you, it's far more fulfilling that way. I'm afraid that cars very often ruin the experience. I think we all know that already. One of the most incredible features of the church I'm heading to is that it's a Georgian masterpiece, pretty much unaltered by the Victorians. Ah. Shelter from the wind. Maybe it's not so good on foot after all. Any glimpse of the church? Not yet. Been stung by enough stinging nettles then. But it's all worth it. The first view of All Saints Church in Chalbury. This is the point where we reach my most humiliating confession as a filmmaker. I started this trip at about 8 o'clock and it was now 4:30. Time races by when you are filming alone. By the time I reached All Saints, I was exhausted. As I stepped across the field to reach this masterpiece of a church, it soon became clear that there was far too much here to film today. I haven't even showed you inside yet. All I could do was sit down and admire the view and vow to come back next time. But there was a strange irony here. So I started the day full of vigour and optimism, gazing up at a building which represented complete tragedy and loss, the end of the line. And my journey ended feeling exhausted with fawns and billowing clouds as I stared at a church which represented a complete beacon of beauty and paradise. There's a story there somewhere, but maybe you can put it into words better than I can. You won't be surprised to know that Chalbury is first on my list as a church to visit next time, to play the organ there. I'm really trying to make my films more and more ambitious, and whether successful or not, they're not funded by anyone. No church, no sponsors. I much prefer doing it on my own. However, if you do enjoy my work, I'd really appreciate it if you might leave a donation using my PayPal link. That's underneath the video, and it really helps to keep me on the road. Thank you so much. In the meantime, as fate would have it, I recorded one more hymn at Witchampton earlier that day. And somehow its words ring true in this episode more than any other, especially the line, "Pilgrim through this barren land." I cannot wait to see you next time. But in the meantime, have a great week, and this is Guide Me, O Thou Great Redeemer.